Nobody saw this coming. Not the analysts. Not the beat reporters who cover both franchises and pride themselves on knowing what is happening inside these organizations before it becomes official. Not the fans who spend their off-seasons tracking every rumor and every whisper and every cryptic social media post looking for signals of what is coming next. Nobody saw this coming. Because the trade that was announced today was not the kind of trade that leaks slowly over several days through anonymous sources and careful hints dropped in press conferences. It arrived all at once. 2 names out. 1 name in. And the 1 name coming in was Seiya Suzuki. The moment it was confirmed, the baseball world did what the baseball world does when something genuinely unexpected happens: it stopped. Just for a second. Just long enough for the reality of what had just been announced to settle from the category of rumor into the category of fact. And then it started again, louder than before, with a specific energy that only arrives when a trade feels like the beginning of something rather than the end. Because this trade felt like the beginning of something. Start with what the Dodgers gave up. Because that is where the story actually begins, not with what they gained, but with what they were willing to let go. And what they let go was significant enough that the announcement carried inside it a kind of institutional honesty that sports organizations rarely display so openly. Blake Trinan. The Oscar Hernandez. 2 names. 2 players with histories inside this organization. 2 players who had contributed, in their different ways, to what the Dodgers had built over the recent seasons. The bad news was delivered before the trade became public. That detail matters. That the organization sat down with Trinan and Hernandez before the announcement, that there were conversations, private ones, in which the players learned what was happening before it appeared on their phones as a notification, says something about how the Dodgers handle these moments. It does not make the moment easier. It does not change what it means for 2 professional athletes to learn that they are being moved. But it says something about the respect embedded in the process. Trinan had been part of this bullpen through moments that the Dodgers will be talking about for years. Hernandez had brought a quality to this lineup that goes beyond statistics, the kind of professional presence that younger players learn from simply by watching. These were not fringe players being moved to clear roster space. These were contributors. Real ones. And the Dodgers moved them anyway. Which tells you everything you need to know about how highly the organization values what they got in return. The Cubs had been sitting on this decision for longer than anyone outside their organization knew. That is the part of the story that the Cubs GM revealed in a press conference that nobody had fully prepared for, the part where the reasoning behind Suzuki's release became public in a way that reframed everything. Because when a team moves a player of Suzuki's caliber, the public assumption is almost always about money. About contracts and luxury tax thresholds and the cold arithmetic of roster construction. And money was part of it. Money is always part of it. But it was not all of it. The GM spoke carefully. The way GMs speak when they are being honest about something that reflects a complicated organizational reality rather than a clean, defensible decision. He talked about direction. About the kind of team the Cubs were building and the timeline they were building toward. He talked about the specific way that Suzuki's situation, his contract, his role, his relationship with the organization's longer-term competitive plans, had arrived at a point where movement made more sense than continuity. And then he said something that the room did not expect. He said the Cubs had not wanted to move Suzuki. That the preference, held internally for longer than the public timeline of this trade suggested, had been to find a way to keep him. That conversations had happened. That alternatives had been explored. And that ultimately, the conclusion the organization reached was that Suzuki deserved to be somewhere he could compete at the highest level immediately, and that the Cubs, in their current construction, could not honestly promise him that. That is a harder thing to say publicly than it sounds. The room was very quiet after he said it. On the other side of the country, inside a Dodgers organization that had just absorbed 2 significant pieces of news simultaneously, the departure of Trinan and Hernandez, the arrival of Suzuki, the energy was different. Not celebratory. Not yet. The Dodgers are a professional organization, and professional organizations do not celebrate trades in the way that fans celebrate trades, immediately and completely and without accounting for the human complexity involved. But there was something in the air. Something that the people inside that building recognized even if they were not saying it out loud. Seiya Suzuki was going to be a Dodger. And Seiya Suzuki was going to be Shohei Ohtani's teammate. That second sentence is the one that changes the shape of everything else. Because Ohtani and Suzuki arriving in the same organization is not just a roster transaction. It is a cultural moment. Two of the most prominent Japanese players in the sport, brought together on the franchise that already carries more global attention than any other team in baseball, playing in a city that has one of the largest Japanese American communities in the United States. The implications extend well beyond the foul lines. The meeting was scheduled almost immediately. 1 hour. Direct. Ohtani and Suzuki, sitting across from each other, in the kind of conversation that does not get reported in detail because both parties understand instinctively that its value lies precisely in its privacy. 1 hour to talk about what this means. About what the Dodgers are building. About what it means to arrive in Los Angeles with the expectations that Suzuki is arriving with, in the middle of a season that already carries enormous weight. Those who were aware the meeting was happening described the scheduling of it as immediate, not something that was planned for next week or arranged through layers of intermediaries, but something that happened with the urgency of two people who understood that the conversation needed to happen quickly and directly. What was said in that room will remain in that room. But the fact that it happened, the fact that Ohtani made it happen, that he treated Suzuki's arrival not as a front office transaction to be acknowledged politely but as a moment requiring direct personal engagement, said something that the box score will never capture. Ohtani understood what this moment was. Not just for himself. Not just for the Dodgers. For Suzuki. For a player who had just been told by one organization that the direction had changed, and who was now walking into a new city, a new clubhouse, a new set of expectations, and needed to feel immediately that the ground beneath him was solid. 1 hour. Direct. That is how Ohtani chose to handle it. The broader baseball reaction moved through several stages, the way reactions to significant trades always do. The first stage was surprise. Pure and immediate. The kind that arrives before analysis and simply occupies the space where analysis will eventually be. Suzuki to the Dodgers was not a trade that had been predicted widely, and the gap between what had been expected and what actually happened was large enough to generate that specific quality of stunned attention that the sport reserves for its genuine shocks. The second stage was arithmetic. Analysts and commentators doing what analysts and commentators do, running the numbers, projecting the lineup, calculating what Suzuki adds to an offense that was already formidable before he arrived. Those numbers were good. Significantly good. The kind of good that makes people start saying things about October that it is technically still too early in the season to say. But the third stage, the one that settled in after the surprise and the arithmetic had done their work, was something harder to quantify. It was the recognition that this trade was not just about what Suzuki does at the plate. It was about what his presence does to the entire construction of this roster. About how he fits alongside Ohtani not just statistically but culturally, in terms of the specific energy that a clubhouse carries when the people inside it feel like they are part of something being built rather than something being maintained. The Dodgers had sent a message with this trade. The message was, "We are not satisfied. We are not finished. We look at what we have and we see what it could become with the right additions, and we are willing to make difficult decisions, difficult for the players being moved, difficult for the organization in terms of what it costs, in service of that vision." That is the message of a team that believes October is not a destination but an expectation. Somewhere in Chicago, Blake Trinan and the Oscar Hernandez were processing news that no professional athlete ever fully prepares for, no matter how long they have been in the sport. The business of baseball arrives without sentiment. It arrives as a transaction, a number, a name on a list. And the human beings inside that transaction are left to make sense of it in whatever way they can. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a meeting room was being prepared for a conversation between two people who had grown up in the same country, who had taken the same improbable path to the highest level of this sport, and who were now going to share a dugout for the remainder of a season that could end in something extraordinary. And somewhere in a front office that had just executed a trade that nobody saw coming, the people who made the decision were sitting with the specific and complicated feeling of having done something significant, something that cost real things and produced real uncertainty and carried real risk, and believing, with the quiet conviction of people who have done this long enough to trust their instincts, that it was right. 2 names out. 1 name in. Seiya Suzuki was going to be a Dodger. And the 1-hour meeting was already scheduled. Baseball was paying attention.